Hey everybody, and welcome back to yet another part in my series on dialing in tones for our Line 6 Helix. The last couple videos I did, I got away from the artist presets that I got tricked into doing, maybe I could call it. No, just kidding. That I was kind of focusing on. And I went back to just doing more generic 4-snapshot patches using specific amps that could be used for studio or live playing. I thought I'd do a fun one. I already did one this week, but I thought I'd do a bonus one. I got kind of in the mood to mess around with another artist patch. And I thought I would do something by ACDC. It's a pretty iconic tone, wonderful tone. And I actually focused on doing something more in the Back in Black vein. This would probably work for most things on the album, but I kind of focused on the song itself. There was a tiny little snippet in the middle where he does that little riff there where it is kind of by itself. So I isolated that. I always like to do that and put the spectrum analyzer on and just sort of see what's happening in the frequencies. It allows me to be able to dial these in a lot quicker. And especially when it's an isolated track like that, it's a lot easier than if it's mixed in with bass and drums and whatnot. So anyways, I kind of focused on that, and I got a tone that I thought worked pretty good for Back in Black. Again, standard disclaimer, I'm using different guitars, different monitoring systems. You're going to be using different guitars for monitoring systems. I'm not claiming this is an exact replica by any means, but I think it's pretty close. The thing I always loved about this tone was kind of the sponginess or the squishiness in the bottom end on it that was really a signature part of that sound for me. I love these terms we come up with, right? Sponginess, squishiness means nothing. But we all do it because there's no better way to describe things. So I hope you understand what I mean by that. It makes sense to me. But anyways, I tried to replicate that. So let's jump over to HXEdit, take a listen or take a look at what I did to create this tone. And I did a separate video like usual where I played through a chunk of the tune. I did some of the rhythm parts. I did the middle solo. I did the bridge part where he plays that riff I just kind of touched on. And that's in a separate video, so you can hear how this tone works in that video. In that video, I would have done 2 rhythm parts, doubled the rhythm part, panned them hard left and right, and for the solo, it's just straight up, but no other processing to it. What you're hearing is the finished product of this patch, which will be up on Custom Tone for you guys to grab if you so desire. All right. So over on HXEdit here, let's take a look at what I did. I started off, a while back I did a guitar solo cover for Shook Me All Night Long. A lot of times with the guitar solo covers, I don't really spend a lot of time dialing those patches in to replicate anything or even try to come close. I just dial something in really quickly that I think is going to work, and I go with it. Ultimately, it's close enough for a quick guitar solo cover video. But I did go with the same amp and speaker cabinet that I used for that because I remember thinking it worked quite nicely. So the amp I chose is one of my favorite Marshall amp sims or amp models that we have in the Helix, which was the latest one I believe that was put out, the Brit Trem, the jump channel, so the 2 channels together, jumped. And I really like this for the low end. There's that like I said, that kind of darkness, almost spongy squishiness to it that comes out really nicely. And I paired that up with the 412 Blackback 30 with the 160 ribbon, because the ribbon is going to give me that low end that I want as well. But it's also very dark. So what I did in true Marshall amp fashion, if you look at this, master would be on 10, presence on 10, channel volume on 10, treble, mid, bass, normal drive, and bright drive all on 10, heading into the 412 Blackback 30 with the 160 ribbon at 1 inch. So with everything else turned off except my compressor at the end, which I always have on, I have the peak reduction at 5.5 and the gain at 5. Everything else is off. I have 2 split crossovers, a bunch of EQs and whatnot, but this tone sounded like this. Okay. I think you can hear what I'm talking about, that low end. It has that nice, like I said, sponginess to it, that almost sag to it that's really, really nice. So I just cranked everything up on this. I said, let's go with this and let's deal with dialing it in using EQs and the split crossover. So I got pretty extreme. Well, one other thing I did right away is I added a little bit of room reverb. And I think you'll notice on a lot of these AC/DC recordings, when they are hitting certain things, there's always a little room ambience. I didn't spend a lot of time on this, and you can play around with this to whatever works for you. But I put the decay on a standard legacy room reverb, decay at 5.1, pre-delay at 11 milliseconds, mix at 35, and I just left it. It works. It worked fine in the mix. This is what you'll hear in the mix too. I didn't add any other processing to it after the fact. What I did do, though, to get some of the attack and the brightness back into this tone while not affecting that bottom end so much is I used two of the split crossovers. So like I said, talked about many times, it's kind of like a low and high shelf, right? And I set one up at 5 kilohertz. I set a second one up at 10 kilohertz. Now, that's going to seem a little crazy because a lot of people are always trying to dial these frequencies out, but in this case, it worked. Underneath, on the first split crossover, underneath 5 kilohertz, I didn't roll anything out or in, but I added 10 dB of that, of all the frequencies above 5 kilohertz. So here's the tone before that. Here it is when I put this in. Now, it gets almost grainy and way too much on top when just left with that. And the funny thing is, I then went to all the frequencies above 10 kilohertz, and I did the same thing. I added another 10 dB. Now, this seems almost insane when you look at it on paper, right? This is not going to work. Watch. I'm going to put this in and let you hear what it sounds like with this. It gets even more harsh. That's awful. I mean, it really is. But how I controlled that all is I came to a parametric EQ just before the reverb, and I dialed in a low cut of 80 hertz and a high cut of 11 kilohertz, while also adding in, with a Q of 2.4, frequency of 2.1 kilohertz, I added in 3.3 dB. I added in at 800 hertz with a Q of 0.9, 5 dB, and at 100 hertz, 6 dB at 1.6 Q. Now, this was a very important EQ to add in. Here's the tone again with these split crossovers put in. Kind of this is not more of an annoying tone at this point, but you're going to see how dramatic it is when we roll everything off above 11 kilohertz. So I've rolled everything off above 11 kilohertz, but then boosted a whole bunch back in with the split crossovers. It seems counterintuitive, but it works. Okay, so here it is without this parametric EQ again. And here it is with that EQ. Really amazing when you hear it without that EQ. There's all that fizziness we don't want. Put that in. Starting to come together now. Okay, but then I had a couple more EQs I added in. I went to another parametric EQ, went down to 110 hertz with a Q of 2.1, added 1.5 dB. And I know a lot of people will say, why'd you add like 100 hertz and 60 dB? Why don't you just bump that up more? It's a process when I'm going through this, right? I find one EQ and I find where I want it, and then I make a couple other tweaks, and then I might have to go balance something else off. So I just kind of keep adding, and by the time I get one done and I move on to another one, I don't want to mess with the other one too much. But there, like I always say, there's a whole bunch of ways to accomplish the same thing. It doesn't have to just be the one way that I'm doing it here, you know. The other thing we can do, if anybody's watched my other video about where I was talking about creating an IR of all the EQs that you put in here and the split crossovers and even your cab if you want. You can do that after the fact, right? Just come in and turn off the amp and the other processing and just capture an IR of just all the EQ curves that you have in here, and then you could slap that in one block. I have another video about that. If anybody's interested, let me know and I'll put the link in for it. So this EQ, like I said, I boosted some, this EQ here. I boosted a little bit more at 110 hertz with a Q of 2.1. I boosted 560 hertz with a Q of 1.4 up 7.2 dB. And at 2.5 kilohertz, I boosted 4.9 dB with a Q of 3.8. So just kind of working a lot on the lows and mid-range to kind of balance off those really extreme high-end boosts that I put in with the split crossover. So without this, here's our tone again. With it, here it is. Okay. And then I wasn't done. I went back in again now with the simple EQ, and I boosted the low end, which is a shelf again. We don't know what frequency this acts is, not given to us, but I boosted the low end 3.5 dB, boosted 1.5 kilohertz up another 4 dB to get that mid-range going, and I put even more sizzle back into this, 12 dB on the high gain. So crazy amount of high end, but it just ended up working, okay? So here it was without that EQ again. And here it is with the final EQ. And you'll really hear at the end, the compressor is doing a lot here to give some of that squishiness I wanted, right? So I think it gives that sufficient sort of the speaker's about to blow up kind of, you know, sound that we all have come to know and love. So I think it's pretty close. I was pretty happy with it. That is it. That's the tone. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to have this up on custom tone for anybody who wants to grab it. Please go check out the other video where I actually use it in the mix. I found kind of a backing track online that was available just on YouTube. It's not the greatest quality, but it gives you an idea of how this will sound. And again, like I said, in that video, double tracked the rhythm guitars, pan them hard and left and right. And then for the solo, it's just slightly off center, I think, in the mix, but nothing's processed other than what you hear in Helix here. So those guitars are recorded and not touched, as all my videos are. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you liked the tone. Leave me your comments. Tell me how it works out with your monitoring system and your guitar. I'm liking it. I think it's a good facsimile that you could use for live, or if you're doing covers or whatever in the studio, and it should work fine. So thanks again so much for tuning in, guys. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate all the support. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm going to have a lot more interesting content, or hopefully interesting content, what I hope to be. That's my goal. Hopefully you guys find it interesting. Please like the video, share it as much as you can. Again, I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you guys again very soon. Ciao for now. Thanks for tuning in.